Your Ford's turbo is designed to last well past 200,000 miles, but I keep seeing them fail before 100,000 miles, sometimes as early as 60,000 miles. The engine is not the problem, the habits are. I have been working on Ford EcoBoost engines for over 15 years, and the turbo failures I see almost always trace back to the same handful of things owners do without even realizing it. None of these habits feel dangerous in the moment. They feel completely normal, which is exactly why they are so widespread and why so many turbos die young. Today, we are breaking down 7 habits that are quietly cooking your turbo from the inside out. Habit number 4 is something almost every single Ford owner does without thinking twice. And habit number 1 is costing people full turbo replacements at $2,500 or more before their truck even hits 100,000 miles on the odometer. Let's get into it. Habit number 7, shutting the engine off immediately after highway driving or towing. This is the single most common turbo killer I see in the shop, and almost nobody knows they're doing it. Here's what happens under the hood. When you're driving on the highway or towing a trailer, your turbocharger spins anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 revolutions per minute. At that speed, the turbo generates enormous heat, especially on the exhaust side, where temperatures can exceed 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit. The turbo's center bearing housing sits right between that scorching exhaust heat and the oil that lubricates and cools the spinning shaft. As long as the engine is running, oil continuously flows through that bearing housing, carrying heat away and keeping the bearings lubricated. But the moment you shut off the engine, oil circulation stops instantly. The turbo shaft is still spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, and the housing around it is still radiating extreme heat, but now there's no fresh oil flowing through to cool it or protect the bearings. The oil that's trapped inside that hot housing starts to cook. It breaks down chemically and forms hard carbon deposits, a process mechanics call coking. Over time, this coked oil residue builds up inside the turbo's oil passages and around the bearings, restricting oil flow and accelerating bearing wear. Eventually, the bearings wear enough that the turbo shaft develops play, you start hearing a whine or whistle that gets louder, and eventually the turbo needs to be rebuilt or replaced. I've pulled turbos out of Ford trucks with less than 70,000 miles that were coked solid, all because the owner towed a trailer up a mountain pass, pulled into a gas station, and shut the engine off within seconds of stopping. The fix costs nothing and takes almost no effort. After highway driving, spirited driving, or towing, let your engine idle for about 60 seconds to 2 minutes before shutting it off. This gives oil time to keep circulating through the turbo while the housing temperature drops to a safer level. If you have a turbo timer installed, it does this automatically. If not, just get in the habit of sitting for a minute before you kill the ignition. This single change alone can add tens of thousands of miles to your turbo's life. Habit number 6, extending oil change intervals or using the wrong oil. Your turbocharger's bearings rely entirely on clean, properly rated oil to survive. There's no separate lubrication system for the turbo. It shares the same oil as the rest of your engine, and that oil has to withstand incredible heat right at the turbo bearing housing. When you stretch oil changes past the recommended interval, or when you use a cheaper conventional oil instead of the full synthetic that Ford specifies for EcoBoost engines, you're setting your turbo up to fail early. Conventional oil breaks down faster under the extreme heat a turbo generates. It loses viscosity, and its ability to form a protective film on bearing surfaces deteriorates. Once that film breaks down, you get metal-on-metal contact inside the turbo, even if it's just for a few milliseconds at a time. Over thousands of miles, that adds up to serious bearing wear. Contaminated or degraded oil also carries more abrasive particles suspended in it, and every one of those particles passes directly through the tiny oil passages feeding your turbo bearings. I've seen Ford EcoBoost turbos fail at 65,000 miles on trucks where the owner was stretching oil changes to 10,000 or 12,000 miles because a sticker somewhere told them synthetic oil lasts longer. Ford's own recommendation for most EcoBoost engines is a full synthetic oil change every 7,500 to 10,000 miles under normal conditions. But if you tow frequently, idle a lot, or drive in extreme temperatures, Ford classifies that as severe duty which cuts the interval down significantly, often to 5,000 miles or less. Most owners have no idea their driving falls under the severe duty schedule. The fix is straightforward. Always use a full synthetic oil that meets Ford's specification, which is usually printed right on the oil cap or in your owner's manual. Don't stretch intervals based on generic oil life monitor estimates if you tow, idle frequently, or do a lot of stop-and-go driving. When in doubt, change it sooner rather than later. It also helps to actually look at your oil during changes, rather than just trusting the calendar. Oil that looks gritty, smells burnt, or has turned noticeably darker than normal is telling you it's past its useful life, regardless of what the mileage counter says. Oil changes are cheap, turbo replacements are not, and the math on that trade-off should make this an easy habit to fix. Habit number 5, flooring the throttle before the engine has warmed up. This one is incredibly common, especially with people who love the instant power of a turbocharged engine. You start the truck in the morning, and within 30 seconds, you're already accelerating hard onto the road. Here's why that's a problem. When your engine is cold, the oil is thicker and hasn't fully circulated to every component yet, including the turbo bearings. It takes anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple of minutes for oil pressure to build fully and for oil to reach every lubricated surface with proper flow. During that warm-up window, the turbo bearings are running with reduced lubrication compared to when the engine is at full operating temperature. Now add heavy throttle input into that equation. Mashing the accelerator on a cold engine spools the turbo up hard and fast, spinning those bearings at high revolutions per minute before they've received adequate lubrication. This creates exactly the kind of metal-on-metal wear scenario that shortens turbo life dramatically. It's the mechanical equivalent of sprinting full speed the second you wake up, before your muscles have warmed up and your joints have proper blood flow. I've seen this pattern especially in EcoBoost F-150 owners who enjoy the quick throttle response and get in the habit of accelerating hard from a cold start every single morning. Combine that with cold weather, where oil is even thicker and takes longer to circulate, and you've got a recipe for accelerated bearing wear that shows up as a whining or whistling turbo sound well before 100,000 miles. The solution isn't complicated. Give your Ford 30 to 60 seconds of easy, light throttle driving before you push it hard. You don't need to sit and idle in the driveway for 5 minutes like people did in the 1980s. Modern oils flow much faster than older formulations. Just ease into your first quarter mile or so instead of flooring it the moment you pull out of the driveway. Your turbo bearings will thank you. Habit number 4, letting your Ford idle for extended periods without driving it. Almost every Ford owner does this at some point, whether it's warming up the truck in the driveway on a cold morning, running the engine while parked to keep the cab comfortable, or sitting in a long drive-through line with the engine running. It feels harmless, but for a turbocharged engine, extended idling is quietly damaging. At idle, the turbo isn't building meaningful boost, but the exhaust side of the turbo housing is still exposed to hot exhaust gases from combustion, even if those gases are cooler than they would be under load. Meanwhile, oil pressure at idle is at its lowest point, since oil pressure is directly tied to engine RPM. That means you have reduced oil flow to the turbo bearings, combined with a housing that's absorbing heat for extended stretches of time. This imbalance accelerates the same oil coking process we talked about earlier, just at a slower pace than the shutdown after towing scenario. Extended idling also contributes to unburned fuel and combustion byproducts collecting in the oil, since the engine never reaches the higher temperatures needed for complete combustion at idle. That diluted, contaminated oil then gets pumped through your turbo bearings, carrying less lubricating protection than clean oil would. I have inspected turbos on trucks used for work purposes, sitting and idling at job sites for hours at a time, that showed noticeably more bearing wear at low mileage compared to trucks that were driven consistently. The fix is simple. Minimize idling whenever you can. If you need to warm up the cabin in winter, modern EcoBoost engines only need about a minute or two before you can start driving gently. If you're waiting somewhere for more than a couple of minutes, shutting the engine off and restarting it is better for your turbo than letting it idle continuously. Your engine and turbo were designed to work under load and reach proper operating temperature, not to sit and idle for extended stretches. Habit number 3, ignoring early warning signs like a whistling noise or a minor check engine light. Turbos rarely fail instantly. They almost always give you warning signs weeks or months before complete failure, and most owners either don't notice or choose to ignore them because the truck still drives fine. A high-pitched whistling or whining sound, especially one that gets louder under acceleration, is often one of the earliest signs of turbo bearing wear or a small boost leak somewhere in the intake system. Increased oil consumption, where you're topping off oil between changes more than you used to, can indicate that turbo seals are starting to wear, allowing oil to seep past into the intake or exhaust system. A check engine light with a code related to boost pressure, like a code indicating underboost or overboost, often points to a developing problem with the turbo, the wastegate, or a vacuum or boost leak somewhere in the system. The problem is that these early symptoms are usually minor and don't affect how the truck drives day to day, so owners keep driving on them for months. But a small boost leak forces the turbo to work harder to maintain the same boost pressure, running it at higher revolutions per minute and higher stress than it should need for normal driving. A developing bearing issue that's ignored will only get worse under continued use, until eventually you get complete bearing failure, which can send metal debris through your entire intake and exhaust system, sometimes destroying the engine along with the turbo. I've had customers bring in trucks with a whistling noise that had been present for 4 or 5 months, thinking it was just normal turbo sound, when it turned out to be a turbo on the verge of complete bearing failure. What would have been a $600 to $900 repair, if caught early, turned into a $3,000 or more repair bill because metal debris had already made its way into the intercooler and intake system. The fix here is simple: vigilance. If you notice a new whistling sound, increased oil consumption, or any check engine light, get it scanned and inspected promptly instead of assuming it's nothing. A basic diagnostic scan takes a shop maybe 15 minutes and often costs little to nothing, yet it can tell you whether you're looking at a simple boost leak from a loose clamp or a genuine bearing problem developing inside the turbo itself. Catching turbo problems early is almost always dramatically cheaper than waiting for complete failure, and it's usually the difference between a repair you barely notice on your credit card statement and one that changes your plans for the month. Habit number 2, towing or hauling heavy loads without engaging tow haul mode, combined with skipping the cool down period afterward. We touched on cool down already, but this specific combination deserves its own spot because of how often I see it and how much damage it causes. When you tow a heavy trailer without engaging tow haul mode, your transmission holds higher gears longer than it should, which means your engine and turbo have to work harder and spin at sustained higher revolutions per minute to maintain speed, especially on grades. Tow haul mode adjusts shift points specifically to keep the engine in a more efficient engine speed range under load, which reduces the amount of time your turbo spends at sustained high boost and high heat. Skip tow haul mode and you're asking your turbo to sustain higher boost pressure for longer stretches, generating more heat than the system is optimized to handle for that kind of driving. Now combine that with shutting the engine off immediately after you finally reach your destination without letting things cool down, and you've stacked 2 turbo-killing habits on top of each other in the exact same trip. This is an extremely common pattern with people who tow occasionally, maybe hauling a boat or camper a few times a year, and don't think about tow haul mode because they're not full-time towers. I've seen turbos on trucks used for occasional heavy towing fail earlier than turbos on trucks that tow constantly, simply because the occasional towers never adjusted their habits for the extra load, while frequent towers learned the correct way to do it. The fix is to always engage tow haul mode anytime you're pulling a trailer over roughly 3,000 pounds or hauling a heavy load in the bed. It's usually a single button near your shifter. Then, when you arrive at your destination after towing, always give the engine that minute or 2 of idle time before shutting it down. These 2 habits together make an enormous difference in turbo longevity for anyone who tows even occasionally. Habit number 1, using a dirty or degraded air filter and ignoring the intake system. This is the habit costing people full turbo replacements before 100,000 miles, and it's the one almost nobody thinks about when they think about turbo health. Your turbocharger's compressor side pulls in air through your engine's intake system, and that air passes through the air filter before it ever reaches the turbo's compressor wheel. A clean air filter allows smooth, unrestricted airflow. A dirty, clogged, or degraded air filter does two damaging things at once. First, it restricts airflow, forcing the turbo to spin faster and work harder to pull in the same volume of air needed to make proper boost. That means more revolutions per minute, more heat, and more stress on the bearings for the same amount of driving. Second, and this is the part most owners never consider, a torn, poorly fitted, or extremely dirty air filter can allow small particles of dirt, dust, and debris to bypass filtration and get pulled directly into the turbo's compressor housing at extremely high speed. Even microscopic particles hitting a compressor wheel spinning at over 100,000 revolutions per minute cause erosion on the wheel's blades over time. This is called compressor wheel erosion, and it changes the aerodynamic balance of the wheel, which then creates uneven stress on the turbo shaft and bearings. I've pulled turbos apart and found compressor wheels with visible pitting and erosion on the blade edges, directly traceable to air filters that were either the wrong size, poorly seated, or simply never replaced on schedule. Aftermarket air filters that don't seal properly against the housing are a common culprit here too, since even a tiny gap around the filter edge allows unfiltered air straight into the intake tract. Cheap paper filters left in far past their replacement interval also become brittle and can develop small tears that let contaminants through. Ford recommends replacing your engine air filter roughly every 20,000 to 30,000 miles under normal conditions. But if you drive in dusty, rural, or construction-heavy environments, that interval should be cut significantly shorter. The fix is one of the cheapest and easiest on this entire list. Check your air filter regularly, replace it on schedule or sooner if you're in a dusty environment, and if you use an aftermarket filter, make absolutely certain it seats properly with a complete seal against the housing. While you're in there, it's worth glancing at the intake tubing and boots for cracks or loose clamps as well, since a poorly sealed intake anywhere along the path has the same effect as a bad filter. This $10 part protects a turbo that costs thousands of dollars to replace, and it's the single most overlooked factor I see in premature turbo failure. Owners will spend money on performance parts and tuning, then never once check the $12 filter sitting between the outside air and their turbo's spinning compressor wheel. Your Ford's turbocharger is a precision piece of engineering capable of spinning faster than a jet engine. But that precision comes with the requirement that you treat it correctly. None of these 7 fixes cost real money or require special tools. They are habit changes. Give it a cool down minute after towing or highway driving, stay on top of oil changes with the right synthetic, ease into throttle when the engine is cold, minimize unnecessary idling, pay attention to early warning signs instead of ignoring them, use tow haul mode when you're hauling anything heavy, and keep a clean, properly sealed air filter in place. Make these changes today, and there's a real chance your turbo outlasts the rest of the truck. If you found this valuable, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell and drop a comment telling me which of these habits you didn't know about until now. Share this with any Ford owner you know who tows, commutes long distances, or just wants their turbo to last. I'll see you in the next one.